find good quality.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to SPSM. That's how this show would open if you left it up to me.
I'm really glad that you chimed in there, Tony, because our previous discussion would not really have been appropriate for
I thought it
the
was
kids.
going somewhere.
For the kids.
I thought it was going somewhere. We actually have a minute or two. We're just doing what is it? The warm open, the soft open.
The warm soft open.
This isn't going.
First of all, for the record, married man here, so the whole warm soft open is not something we're familiar with.
It's gonna be a real loose opening.
You're not going to trick me, Maxwell.
Not again.
Oh my goodness! Did you see? So we're going to talk about Fitbit and activity and mood trackers tonight, and we're going to talk a little bit about how like sort of regulation and business and sort of platform structure are really shaping some things that are happening, which I think are really interesting. Also, we had a really interesting conversation about tracking with Ophir Frieder and Jonathan Singer, and of course Glenn Coppersmith and the lovely Jessica Coppersmith at with some of the best sushi I may have ever had.
Not a fan of sushi.
Right.
I like to cook food. I like to cook. I like my meat. I like my fish cooked. I don't.
Well, you can have cooked sushi if you're.
It's not really. Is it that? Is it? It's not really sushi then, is it?
Yeah, actually, it is. Sushi refers to the rice.
What does it refer to, Tony?
It's sashimi we're talking about, Bart.
Right. Sashimi.
Sashimi, and we're live.
Sashimi.
It really is 9 o'clock.
Sashimi.
Right. So this is an interesting topic that we've been meaning to talk about for a little while today, and my Twitter is not updating like it should.
Sushi tips.
I am at Doc Foreman.
Oh no, not sushi tips. Okay, sorry. I thought it was going to be sushi tips this week.
Well, I was just reading you can't even get real wasabi. Like real wasabi is really expensive, and you really
real
only
wasabi is very hard to get, but you don't need real wasabi. It's fine.
Not for suicide prevention.
You sure don't?
Hashtag SPSM, Suicide Prevention Social Media Chat. We're here to talk a little bit about Fitbit activity trackers, the FDA pilot program that started in September, and some of the innovations surrounding that, and how we think it's going to be impacting suicide prevention. Is it going to get a little technical? Absolutely.
No.
Is it going to be dry? Absolutely not.
Ooh.
34. And we're definitely not going to discuss Muppet pornography. I'm at Doc Foreman. We're going to be talking about the Fitbit, and we're going to be talking about why the Fitbit is important. And by the way, if you have Fitbit data that you would like to donate for suicide prevention research, you can donate your Fitbit data at ourdatahelps.org. That being said, Mr. Tony Wood, say hello to the people.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tony Wood. I'm the chair of the board of the American Association of Suicidology, as well as COO of Quantify. We're a nifty little software company. Uh-oh. I mean, I keep forgetting it's my bio.
Nifty's still really close to groovy. I just think that you're. No, go ahead. It's fine.
It's fine.
Let's talk about appropriation, because I've got some great bits on appropriation as well.
Cultural or otherwise?
Just in general.
Oh, okay.
General appropriation.
Indeed. Go ahead, Bart.
Dr. Bart Andrews, Vice President of Telehealth, Home and Community Services at Behavioral Health Response, a groovy, trademarked, Tony, groovy little crisis line in St. Louis, Missouri.
No court will convict me. Go ahead.
Actually, we've talked to the attorneys, Tony, and in fact, there's a real risk for you. I think that the judge also may have mentioned in that one hearing that your arrogance over the matter was creating some problems. So, on a side note,
judge was intoxicated.
I think that the pre-show content may have not been the way to lead into this show.
It wasn't the best foreplay that we've ever had.
I think that I think some of us can switch and some of us can't. Anyway, really excited to be talking about Fitbits and what this means for mental health and suicide prevention. And let's turn it over to Chris Maxwell, Daddy Dog, aka Kit Maxwell, attorney at large.
Oh my God.
I have not officially assumed the name Kit, but if you
We talked
want to
about this,
call me
though. You were
Kit,
thinking about it. You were
if you
thinking
want
about
to-
it.
If you want to call me Kit,
Is that
I
going to
will
be
not
your
stop
stage
you.
name?
Like the car that can talk?
Like the talking car.
Yeah. Hey everybody, I'm Chris Maxwell. I'm communications coordinator for a jazzy little organization called the American Association of Suicidology. I'm also super excited to poke Bart's buttons and also talk about Fitbit and how the new stuff coming out of Fitbit is really going to make a huge difference and a big impact in our field. It's hard to be serious with people cracking up.
No, you were good. You're just not going to make it easy for me tonight.
No.
This is the real problem, right?
Oh my God.
And even my brother is texting me about the dirty jokes. The warm up went sideways is all I can say. So we want to talk a little bit about Fitbit data, because in fact our data helps has been collecting Fitbit data for a while. Like what, a year and a half, Tony? 2 years?
What is Our Data Helps after all?
Tell them.
Oh, Our Data Helps is where you can donate your data for mental health research. You can donate Fitbit. You can donate Instagram. You can donate Facebook. You can donate Twitter. You can donate Strava. You can donate Runkeeper. You can donate your data.
I don't even know what those last two things are.
I didn't. Is that new? I didn't know you could donate Strava or Runkeeper.
I don't even know what those are.
Yeah.
What? How do you even know what those are?
You can donate Jawbone if you got it.
Oh.
So we're going to talk a little bit about why we're doing tonight's topics. A couple of things. So number one, we've been intending to talk about this because we think that there is probably we know there's very likely valuable digital signal in your activity trackers and in your mood trackers. And of course, those kinds of devices have really proliferated in the last couple of years. Wearables as something that collects information and then gives you feedback has been a market that has taken off, but has sort of some interesting design issues or some interesting pitfalls. And I can't talk about everything, but I've had the unique opportunity to sort of be discussing this with researchers of various stripes, and also to really discuss how research related to wearables and FDA certification of wearables as medical devices has sort of really changed in the last year. And in addition, we had a really interesting dinner with Ophir Frieder, who I'm sure is watching because that's what he does, right, on a Sunday night, Tony?
I don't think so.
Right. I only wish I could get him to watch tonight so that he could violently correct me in his particular way. But Ophir Frieder is wonderful. He was at the AAS conference. He was one of the poster judges. And several of us, Jonathan Singer, Tony Wood, Glenn Coppersmith, and I, and his lovely wife, Jessica Coppersmith, all went out to a lovely sushi dinner where we discussed some of these issues. And he was discussing what you can know about people by tracking their geolocation. And he was really explaining sort of how that went down.
Wait, why did I get invited to the sushi dinner?
Well, it was after 8:30, Bart. We know how those invitations go.
Yeah, no, I can't. Okay.
All right. You had already gone to the party and left before our dinner had even finished, and we even made it to the party.
I'm responsible that I go to bed early.
Already in your cap.
Yes. Sorry. Proceed. My bad.
Proceed. Yeah, and I may have kidnapped. So one of the things that Ophir Frieder did was he really explained how you can tell a lot about a person by geolocating them and knowing where they went and what time they went there. And I'm going to mess it up. Tony, is there any way you can give me an assist on this?
Oh, the detection of things about people based upon their...
Just where they move around.
Oh, when they move around. Yeah. Okay. So this refers to some patented work that Quantify currently works on. That the idea being that... And there's a lot of technology that does this. So the idea is that if you know somebody's geolocation on the planet already, you immediately learn a lot of things about them just by knowing their location. Then if you know their patterns of behavior, So where they're traveling to during the day and at what times, you learn a lot of things about an individual person without ever having to bother them by asking them self-report questions, doing surveys on them. So, for example, if somebody goes to an office building every day for about 8 hours, you can assume that they work there. And you can sort of extrapolate out that based upon somebody's patterns of behavior being regular, because most of us do almost the same thing every day with very little variation, then you can establish a baseline and very easily calculate a lot of things about somebody, including age and gender and a lot of preferences that they may have. You can score those to high levels of certainty. Now imagine that you have somebody that has more variation in their activities. Okay, let's go on that journey. Well, the point of this is that the software that you can build models that can easily adjust by quote unquote watching, but it's really calculating things about the person's variations. So you could imagine a person who travels a lot for work. You can imagine almost of a set of human experiences that cover the realities of modern life. There's no need to limit those to just simple models of like work, home, Starbucks.
Mm-hmm. If I go to the school at 3, if I go to the Starbucks, then go to the school at 3:45, the elementary school, then go to Target, then go to pick up, then go to Costco and come home.
Yep.
Like, and stay there all night. I'm a basic white bitch. Like, it would know that about me. And if I was doing that and then suddenly I was only picking up my kid every other week. I was only picking up my kid every other week and was then not picking up my kid, or like those things. We might know something happened in my relationship, my custody of my kid, might know that I was under stress, for example, all sorts of things. So not only when I was active, but also where I was active. And if it was that I was suddenly going to Target or like doing store runs at 2 a.m. when I hadn't been doing that before, maybe I've had a job change, maybe I have insomnia, maybe I'm up in the middle of the night. So there's a lot of ways that activity trackers can tell us stuff about ourselves. And Fitbit, Fitbit had a lot of reasons to be very aware of that. So not only we think that there's valuable data to when you're active, that we could probably also track stuff about how well you're sleeping. And of course, several apps do that. And then in addition,
Fitbit does
where
not
you're going.
offer features, to be clear. Fitbit, the fancier Fitbits that have GPS built into them simply track your location over time. And they're pedometers and heart rate monitors. That's the 3 things that they do: GPS, pedometer, heart rate. Fitbit currently has models that help monitor your heart rate variability, that try to estimate your cardiovascular health. But beyond that, Fitbit does not have a lot of fancy models like the one that I described to you that they apply. Now, if you were to give your data to someone or more someone's for research, that's the kind of things that they can do. They can build those models and you can imagine a situation where those might be therapeutically valuable.
And while we were in sort of the warm-up, one of the questions you asked, a really, really great question, Chris, which was why don't you ask that question you asked about me about why track mood?
Which question was this?
Like, why do that over like a PQ, right?
Yeah, no. So what makes this better or worse or different than tracking with a paper form like a PHQ-2 or a PHQ-9? How does this make it any better than that?
So the answer is it probably depends on what you're going to use the data for. But with a PHQ-2 or PHQ-9, and Fitbit, we'll talk about the FDA pilot program in a minute, but when you're able to do mood tracking on a daily basis or at several points during the day, what you're getting is like if I did your PHQ 2 or 9 here, and then when you came in for your med refill in a month, I have a whole bunch of like stuff that happened in between where you had mood changes. And so number one, the points in time where you're entering clinic may not be great in terms of being too far apart and missing a lot of valuable data about your functioning. And then in addition to that, it could also be, in fact, that people's self-reports, that there's probably less error in them when you're taking them a bunch over time than when you're asking somebody. So when somebody's reporting, you know, a PHQ-2 or a PHQ-9 at a point in time, there may be some distortion about mood. So two clients come in and they say, I'm doing okay. And they have two.
Could we talk about transparency for a second?
Can we?
Can we?
Go for it.
Our PHQ, our friends in the PHQ business, which the PHQs are much better than nothing by, you know, proven to be much better than nothing by far. Mm-hmm. However, by their nature, by the nature of being a patient health questionnaire, mm-hmm. they are very transparent. Mm-hmm. So if you have something that's going on with you that you might wish to conceal from your doctor for various reasons, or that you think you should conceal, but you really shouldn't conceal, but you get it. They're pretty transparent. Whereas mm-hmm. your data over time, it's much harder to play games with your patterns of behavior than it is to simply just say, no, I'm fine.
Bart?
I think,
I'm sorry.
So Travis asked a really good question on the line about who's using activity tracking to predict suicide? And I know Tony's alluded that
nobody's doing it yet. There are some interesting things in the fancy rehab world, and super fancy. This is the wealthy people only, pretty much, as far as I know. There is a program that's being currently sold that will track some, I believe, both drug and alcohol related patterns. And I can't remember the name of that company. I think it's called like Radar or something like that. And the idea is that when the person is in the intake of the recovery process of inpatient, they agree to all this. Obviously, this isn't done behind their back or anything. They document where their regular suppliers of narcotics are and where their regular haunts are when they find themselves in need of alcohol, and they record those addresses, and then the Radar app will notify the clinicians that in the future if you visit places near those places. But that's the only one that I'm aware of that's currently in use.
So I think there's some things. Tony mentioned transparency, and there's a couple interesting things around measures that are face valid, so that I can tell by the questions being asked what people would be asking about. You're sad most of the time, 3 to 5 times a week, 1 to 2 times a week. These are questions that are very transparent. They have face validity. People know what you're asking for, and they're predictive. But if people don't want you to know they're depressed or sad, maybe they won't disclose. I think that's there are some people that purposely hide their depression or their suicide thoughts. I actually think that's a small number of folks. I think there's a much greater percentage of folks that actually aren't particularly in tune to their risk level or to their level of depression and their struggle. They often are somaticizing and having lots of other things that are bothering them, and they might not even be aware that they're depressed. Since I'm reading Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow right now, if there's anything we know now about the human cognition, is that we're extremely uninsightful about both our environment and the things that are influencing us. And I think that one of the hard things, this is really hard until you get into the research. Guys, I got bad news for you. The things that you think cause you to do the things aren't the things that are causing you to do the things that you think they are.
Right.
And that's so one of the things I think that's very compelling about these activity trackers is that we know that state-dependent reporting and state-dependent memory is a real challenge with suicide. There's this great, I don't know if you guys know about the paradox about suicide prevalence, suicide thought prevalence, that if you look at the number of people who report having suicide thoughts in the last year, it's about 5% of the population. And if you look at the number of people who've had suicide thoughts in the last 2 weeks, it's about 5% of the population. These numbers should not be the same. The number of people who've had suicide thoughts in the last year should be significantly higher than the number of people who've had suicide thoughts in the last couple of weeks. So we have this, we know that people are often not particularly aware of their risk level or how close they are or how bad of a spot they're in. Some people are, some people aren't. We also know that our behavior, that there are signals in our behavior and changes in our behavior that are probably a lot more predictive and a lot more helpful in understanding people's distress, their struggle, and that there's something going on.
Mm-hmm.
We know that sleep disruption is a huge part of suicide prevention and what drives suicide thoughts. Dr. Schneidman mentioned this idea of agitation. We know that agitation is a huge predictor of suicide, people being agitated, but do people often know that they're agitated? Maybe, and people often misunderstand what agitation actually is. So
Right.
I think there's probably lots of good behavioral markers around sleep, restlessness, movement, and change. And I think this, you were talking about this earlier, April. I know this is really long-winded, but this idea that the changes in people's behavior, them being their own test subject, right? Their own control, that we can learn a lot about how people's behavior changes over time, and that will give us signals about distress. So I think these are the sorts of things that geo-tracking, tracking movements, tracking activity, tracking sleep, things that the Fitbit can do could be extremely helpful to providing signals and points for intervention, both diagnosis and intervention, actually.
Mm-hmm.
And the high frequency nature of the data does away with a lot of error problems.
Yes.
That you just simply could never achieve with self-report measures unless you moved a clinician in with somebody and they were just like about every 10 minutes they were like, hey, how are you doing?
Right. Yeah. So it's like not even that you as an individual might not be mindful enough. Like with borderline personality disorder, when you're getting DBT, one of the very first things, the skill we learn is how to be mindful, because in order for you to use a lot of the DBT skills, you have to sort of be aware of yourself. Many people at risk of suicide, like that's really actually very hard. So when we have things like activity trackers like a Fitbit, who's now moving into mental health and wanting to track mood, like that is sort of one step towards making something where you don't have to be as mindful. You can be very, very passive. A lot of data can be tracked. It can have less error, and it could be like made medically useful to your doctor, much like, you know, a heart Holter monitor might be, right? So the question is like how do things impact whether this stuff gets developed or not? And in September, the FDA started a pilot program to fast track software development with devices. So when you have something that is considered a medical device, it has a very different bar of control and review than something that you put like as a novelty, just a wearable, and oh look, I can track my activity for information purposes, versus this is going to be a wearable, I'm going to get information, I'm going to make health decisions based on this, or I'm going to engage in a health intervention based on this. And the problem, of course, is that the FDA process was so slow that it made development, like just didn't move at the pace of technology development. And so what the FDA started doing in September was that they're testing, and Fitbit is one of the organizations participating in this, that they're going to certify an organization to develop the software. So you, Fitbit, are going to be a certified developer of software for your Fitbit that it will be that will meet medical device regulations, versus certifying the software. And that is to incentivize Fitbit to develop stuff faster. Now in the warm-up, we were talking a little bit about like Fitbit versus Apple Watch. Who wants to take that on?
I can address that. So this is kind of where the market comes into play with something like this, in terms of trying to make it innovative, but also trying to make sure that people stick with it, so that you lower those abandonment rates. So Apple, when they released, and it goes back to when they released their iPhone, and I'm sure even before them, Apple has been traditionally a very closed garden kind of ecosystem when it comes to their hardware and their software. So when they released their iPhone, they had a closed ecosystem. No developers could put their own apps on the iPhone. They quickly learned that that was not going to work. They had their SDK, their software development kit put out. They learned that the lesson with the iPad, and then with all of their other stuff, but then also with the Apple Watch. So one of the main drivers for the Apple Watch, and mind you, in the timeline of things, Fitbit was king in the world of wearables when the Apple Watch came out. Fitbit had some ridiculous market share, way over half, probably close to like 70 or 80% of the market share. So when Apple came out with their Apple Watch, that SDK was pretty much built in natively from the get-go. It was baked into the system. And so that allowed people to throw their apps to integrate with the Apple Watch from the iPhone or from Mac OS. Fitbit did not have that. They hadn't had that for the entire time it existed. So now what we see with this FDA move and this push, in conjunction with that, almost at the exact same time, Fitbit released their own SDK, and then also pushed forth some featured apps that their team, their labs team has created, and one of those happens to be this mood tracking app. But it also opens up this entire landscape for independent developers or major organizations to look at how this wearable might come into play when tracking mental health, when it comes to tracking suicide risk or risky behaviors in general. So now we all have kind of this opportunity to check out this SDK and start putting programs and apps onto these watches. So it's a really exciting time, but it's also kind of one of those times where they kind of have to balance the line really perfectly, because if they mess it up, then they've wasted a lot of money, they've wasted a lot of time. They've tried to create their own ecosystem that combats Apple, and Apple right now is pretty high tier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And someone even just mentioned about using wearable tech as a grounding technique or as another technique. So yes, so not only having like passive data monitoring about your activity level in order to predict maybe your suicide risk, but also maybe there's a prompt, right? And so of course, some of the things that Fitbit is doing is it's gamifying the Fitbit. So it might encourage you to engage in games. We talked about, Pokemon Go is one that like the very, very simple ones made for children work for me great. And another one is Animal Crossing, where it could motivate me to do all sorts of things. Well, you could gamify very similarly behaviors that might improve mood or might stabilize you or might help with sleeping, for example, or might prompt your doctor to check in on you, or sort of a host of things, or might say your heart rate's just gone up and you're agitated, like might be time to do a grounding exercise, exercise. And by the way, we'll guide you through one really quickly. If you press this button, like there's probably a bunch of things that can be designed into that. So once we know what's going on, that there could be push responses that then we could test, because like what we think works as therapists that we would use in face-to-face therapy might not be as effective of a nudge as something else, right? Like, remember we talked about behavioral economy, and it might be like, would you be willing to practice a breathing exercise to teach a friend? And really, it's nudging you to do that because your heart rate's up and you need to slow your heart rate down.
Yeah, and the thing that Apple, or I mean, really any of these wearables, these wearable companies haven't figured out is that accurate frequency of nudges, or the effective frequency of nudges. When you get your Apple Watch, it has a breathing exercise app, like pre-installed, nudging you, like as soon as you plug it in. The problem is that it did it way too frequently for me. And it's not based on any sort of actual biometric data. It's just like they have it preset to have this frequency. So it's just way too many times. I had to go into the settings and actually, I turned it off because I didn't feel like having to figure out when I needed the frequency to be. So it'll be interesting again to see if Fitbit can try to use some more effective data from the person to actually provide that nudge in a way that makes sense for that individual person.
Bart.
Yeah, so there's lots of good conversation going on in the thread. One of the things I want to point out first, Elise pointed out that concern about over monitoring, and that there are some people that having a Fitbit and having constant information about their activity could be problematic for them. And there's actually research. There's some research been done that shows that Fitbits can have negative impacts on people's health and their well-being because they become too focused on the constant monitoring. And that can create other challenges. So I think, like with any technology, with anything, it's really about goodness of fit for people. And that this approach, there's no approach that's going to work for everybody. And any approach, this is really important. Any approach, just like medication, just like therapies, can be counterindicated for different folks, right? We're not going to have anything that works for everybody all the time. That's just not the way.
Good gracious, do I hope that somebody out there invents a panacea for mental health.
Yeah, I don't.
But it's just a little bit.
Not gonna happen. But I think
it's possible. It's just very improbable.
It is. But to Lisa's point, and one of the things I commented was that it could be really helpful for people in that person's life, maybe their healthcare team, to have access to the information. So there might be some people where having direct access to the information may not be very helpful for them, but having a group of folks that they trust to monitor and use that information in a helpful way could be really helpful. And there's lots of things that we can do. Here's what's fascinating to me is that, once again, just like with therapy, we've done a horrible job. We've looked at therapy in terms of what works for people who are depressed, what works for this group, instead of looking at why does it help different people and not help other people. We haven't really looked at how this technology works on an individual level, and what are people that benefit from this sorts of interactions and this sorts of monitoring, and what other people might not benefit or be harmed by this thing. And I think that's one of the reasons you get all these really discordant results. You'll see one study that says being on social media is bad for you. You'll see another study that shows actually people show mood improvement from being on social media till age 30. So because we're capturing different slices at different times, a lot of these impacts that are very individualistic are getting lost in the group data. And I think with these sorts of things, we need to have a much better sense of how the individual is going to respond, just like we do with medications, right?
Well, the beauty of technology is that it is possible, especially this sort of technology, is that it is possible to create logic that would help eliminate or help dose its own usage. So there's no reason that in the future some set of logic would be set on top and help the individual and their care team decide whether this was the right implementation for them. There's just similar to trying a new medication, but much less disruptive.
And we've got folks talking about wearables in terms of interventions that would vibrate when you're self-harming to sort of cue you to stop or use a coping technique. And Amber Cannon says, I still think that once insurance gets a hold of your data, you're hooped. Just a little clue, insurance has your data. Like they really have your data. And it's not just your healthcare insurance. It has your data. Your financial institution probably has data about your wellness. And so does anybody who does your life insurance. And this actuarial data may be very accurate as well. So like a lot of data is held about you as a person. By the way, I know you're listening, my dear brother, BJ. Like a lot of data is held about you as a person that is invisible to you, right? But probably useful for saving your life in some way.
Yeah, this is largely, the work we do at Quantify is largely about building interfaces to data that already exists in order to help people use it for therapeutic reasons. It's not, it's the same data that we're asking you to donate is already being used by Facebook to decide what advertisements to show you, and is already being used by Google to decide what advertisements to show you, and is already being used by Fitbit to determine what advertisements to show you. You might be seeing a theme here. There's a lot of retail involved.
But it could be, in fact, that Amber's not wrong, that that could be used against people. But what you would hope is that you would get suicidologists and people who sort of have some skin in the game about solving these problems ethically and responsibly, as opposed to like absenting ourselves from this conversation. Because one of the things,
yes, I mean,
yeah,
like the ethical concerns are a real consideration, and I think I always hate throwing people into the wolves of academic review, but there are some great emerging papers regarding the ethical use of technology and trying to find ways to do a good job of serving people and helping them get better, but also protecting their rights and being considerate of their rights as a patient.
Art.
Well, I think one of the things we're talking about here is really interesting in that there's really good research about our humans and risk evaluation and how we evaluate risk, and specifically around technology. And it turns out that we suck at it really bad. And so one of the things that we tend to do is that we tend to bifurcate or break into categories. There's technology that's good, that's low risk to us, and we're just going to go hog wild on, or there's technology that has a high risk and very little benefit. And so we're not going to do that. And it turns out that our judgments about these things are absolutely horrible. We're really bad at estimating risk in these situations. Every technology that we're engaging with has potential things that can be helpful for us, that can be harmful for us. And we need to be extremely logical and rational. And I think this is really important. We can't let fears and risk aversion prevent us from using tools that can be really helpful. One, you can also come up with some models that really do break down what the real risks are. With insurance, I think insurance is a really good thing to bring up. My guess is as we get more and more advanced with some of these things, that we're going to have legal protections that you can't discriminate against people based on these data points. We've already have version of that with genetic testings and some other things, right? Now with life insurance, the actuarial models for life insurance are already really amazingly good. I don't think they're too worried about having to refine those models a whole lot more, because their ability to predict your risk level for life insurance is amazingly good right now. So I don't think that's an issue. I think that, to Amber's point, this is really important. I don't believe that in terms of providing people healthcare insurance, I think we should all be in the same pool. I think there's evidence that's the only way health insurance is going to work if everybody's in the same damn pool, and that there's going to be people with different risk levels, and we all need to cover each other's risks, so to speak, which is how insurance works the best. That's my 2 cents.
Excellently said. We just had a tweet from Em about feeling better without wearing her wearable. And there's one instance where I tap my wrist to check the time even when I'm not wearing it. Katie Gordon, hello. One of the challenges, I don't know why I did that voice for you. I can't tell you. One of the challenges in using wearable devices in suicide prevention efforts is figuring out how to work effectively with the regard to diversity between people. Absolutely. Now, the good news is that's very granular differentiation is what these data scientists are working on. So the fact is that Fitbit does have a mental health development wing. Like they've said, our business, we're focusing on development in 4 areas. And mental health is going to be one of them. The question I have is not whether they'll do it right, but whether they'll include people like us when it's done, when they're doing it. People who are expert about this topic, or are they going to just launch products and maybe this insight's included, but just maybe it's not. I would love for them to say, yes, we've got this great diversity, but more importantly, I would just love to be at the table when these things are developed. Tony, you have some say about this, I know.
I think it's a good idea to develop technology.
Tell us more about that, Tony. What are there good things about you're pro-technology? I'm assuming you're also pro-life in terms of life is valuable. You believe life is worth preserving.
Generally.
Any other generalities that you could share about yourself that tell us absolutely nothing about you as a person?
I'm pro foods and shelter.
Excellent. We learned so much about you, Tony.
There's times that's all right.
Very interested
in
supporting personal actualization.
So one of the things that I think is interesting about this story, though, is that Fitbit, maybe there's some altruism going on at Fitbit. I assume that they are. Love to talk to you. But that being said, things that, Chris mentioned and things that we sort of in some of the research for this and talking with others, this is really about what data can we collect? How can we use it for development? How can we sell that data? How can we build a medical device that we can then sell that your healthcare, your healthcare insurance can reimburse for you to participate in? How can we make a wearable that you will wear and that will improve your quality of life for money? And so there are going to be a lot of people making products to sell us. I would love for experts in suicide prevention to be at the table when that happens. And I thought you were going to give a little Tony speech, but I was happy to give it for you.
That's the speech you thought I was going to give?
Yeah.
Oh.
I feel like I've heard it before, but go ahead, Chris.
One of the things that I've dreamed about when we're talking about wearables and we're talking about tracking social media and search. I do dream about this. It's kind of embarrassing. When we're talking about tracking social media, tracking biometrics, geolocation, all of this shit, search information. If you have, and Anne-Marie had posted something back in the feed earlier tonight about how Samsung has like their health kit, like on their cell phones. Apple has their health kit. Android has one that's very similar. So why not have something in one of these health kits or have a separate app that can kind of take all of the data from all of these different sources, run it through an algorithm, accurately predict risk, right? It has to be developed. Why not, right? But the thing that every single time I've said, okay, well, we just have this one app that can accurately predict risk within a matter of like a week, right? It says you are at risk in a week of either trying to self-injure, or you're at risk of a heart malady, or you're at risk for whatever, or you're at risk for suicide. But the constant thing that I keep hearing is, well, that's creepy, right? Like, I don't like the idea of them tracking me. I don't like the idea of them knowing what I'm doing. Not necessarily realizing that largely all of these individuals, all of these organizations are doing it already on some level or another. So if we can use it to protect people. So the reason I thought of this is because Travis had a good tweet that we talk about airline security. I dislike being frisked, but I love riding airplanes without terrorists and weaponry. In the same vein, we make a trade-off with data and safety. How much data are we willing to share, and at what cost? Not a negative cost, a positive one. And it's about saving lives.
But I like this Mr. Potato Head meme of you.
I've got really bad news for you on this, Chris. The data on our TSA screening is really bad. They don't actually identify true threats.
But that's not really Travis's point, is it?
No, it's the fact.
It is.
The fact that,
well, I think it is because we give up this. So if the monitoring doesn't actually produce something meaningful, which in this case, you have an illusion that it does.
Oh, just a minute.
You have an illusion that it does.
People feel safer?
Only because they don't know that they're not. So.
But that's a different discussion. The point is that it does produce.
So you're saying spend billions of dollars for.
Did I say that? I don't remember what I said.
Okay.
Did I say that? Tell me. Did I say that?
Okay.
It does have.
Oh, yes. Doc Foreman treatment. This is, if anybody ever wants to know, this is what he does to you.
Now stop.
This is how Tony gets you.
This says no. He's a tax and spend liberal that doesn't care about outcomes. I think that as long as you're spending money on it and it feels good, do it.
More. But just
I like that the double entendre not shocking, but you say tax and spend liberal. What?
I would have expected more of an answer. Let's use data and let's use a system that be more efficient and actually.
Well, I think that we all know what system is more efficient. I hate to bring up that it's Israel's, but it is. Guess how many hijackings they've had? 0. Guess how many bombings they've had on planes?
We're way off topic.
None. They have a great system. We're not going to do it.
So the issue isn't. I think the issue is that there are digital signals that have to do with your activity levels. There are signals with sleep. My daughter is one of those people who her mood and cognitive functioning and emotional regulation is deeply impacted by her sleep, which is really irregular and has been since she was born. And that child uses an app to measure the quality of her sleep, which she tracks, and then does interventions and notes her mood. And I know she's my child, so we all know what kind of a parent I am. But but when she's really emotional, she goes back and checks her sleep log, and she makes some adjustments to like improve her mood. And there's probably more sophisticated versions of that. She uses apps to give herself the right amount of white noise to make sure she can sleep. And she specifically employs those on days when she hasn't slept enough, specifically because she knows that's a trigger for her. Tony, we've talked about this, that one of the things that was looking at we did a lot of looking at your data about sleep, because I'm a nerd for looking at monitoring myself and looking at data. And we discovered that if you got above 10,000 steps, your sleep patterns were different, right?
5,000.
Explain that whole process.
Well, it's not that complicated. You just kind of did. It turns out that if my step count is above 5,000, my sleep patterns are better, improve dramatically. Mm-hmm. So simple. It's a simple correlation. Now, correlation doesn't make causation, but I can tell you that when I don't, it's a pretty consistent on-off. So I do better if I have just a very relatively low level of physical activity in a given day.
And when, to Katie Gordon's and many other points about diversity, I think that there's probably some way that we can automate helping people figure out which digital signal they really need to focus on, like to monitor a bunch of signals and say, this is your strongest predictor, heads up. Well, that would be a great use of that.
Well, there's no reason. The models are much better at this than a person, because they're consistent.
Right.
There would be no reason to not continue to build a more complex picture of what behavior looks like and take all the inputs, and some of the patterns could be very subtle for an individual person, or even a population basis, a community or a large or slightly larger cohort. And those things could be very valuable, and they'd be very difficult for a person to say, oh, that's valuable and that's not. Whereas as a model, the statistics are quite clever about picking out, about controlling a bunch of noise and getting you down to some useful metrics.
Yeah, when you do like CBTI for cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, they're really, I remember doing my sleep and behavior log, which was really difficult, time consuming. And then I had to look at the numbers and guess, and you can imagine paying a person to do it, and you're not only tracking a couple variables, and the tracking of the log, for me to collect that data about myself was very hard. And so there were all these therapy interventions to get a patient to do very rudimentary tracking. So I think that there's, at least for very basic things like that, and sleep dysregulation plays a role in many mental illnesses. It really does. Finding a way to automate that and not make it so hard would be awesome.
So it would be incredibly helpful. I think one of the concepts I've been really pushing is this idea of vital signs. We have really good biomarkers for vital signs for physical health. We can look at people's heart rate. We can look at their blood pressure. We can look at their sugar levels. There's some pretty easy low bar things that we can do to look at people's general health and wellness in a medical sense. Behavioral health and emotional wellness is a much more complicated system, and we don't have really reliable health indicators, right? We can tell when people are in really bad shape sometimes, and we can tell people when they're healthy sometimes, but we don't have really reliable objective metrics for determining people's general wellness. How tired are people? How much is their sleep impacting their behavior? And here's one of the things that we know. We know that people, their ability to control their behavior is a function of sleep and energy. As people's energy levels go down and fatigue goes up, their ability to eat better. There's so much data that shows when people are tired, they make much more poor dietary choices.
Don't talk about me nasty.
I'm not talking about nasty. I do want to point out, Amber asked a really good question on the thread. We know that a lot of these big data companies and systems have information about us that can indicate our health and wellness, right? There's all kinds of stuff that suggests that the big data companies can tell a lot about us, and maybe even our risk of suicide, for instance. Why aren't they doing something with that data? Why aren't they using that data to save lives? I think it's a really fair question. And I think that the answer is that there's lots of reasons why, for instance, like a Google or a Facebook isn't going to be able to use your data to intervene in your life. One, are privacy concerns. Two, there's no funding mechanism or resource for them to actually start intervening with people. That would be an incredibly large undertaking. The third problem is we don't even know what interventions would work, right? So and I know I've said this a lot, but BHR was involved in a Twitter study using an algorithm that had really good success in predicting depression and suicide. You reach out to people that were flagged in this algorithm, they completely blew you off, right? They had no interest in engaging with you. Thousands of attempts, we had a couple of hits where people engaged us. So we don't really have good mechanisms for, even if we have these signals, how do we interact with people and alter this course?
Sell them some melatonin, like I would say, seriously, sell them a sleep aid. See if they bite, like advertise a sleep aid.
Give them a sleep aid. I mean, if make it low entry. Oh, hey, we see that you're not sleeping.
This 99-cent app improves sleep for 3 out of 5 users. Think. Like, I mean, I'm not saying do that, but like I can imagine interventions like that versus how sick are you? Or, what, it wasn't Ian Sarah, it was Brian. So help me with his last name.
Who are you talking about?
Brian Bauer, who we had. What you would want to do is flag those people and say, hey, would you be willing to learn some, about the signs of suicide and help your friend get help? Like, so the part of this is the signal detection. And then the other part of this is which of the messages or nudges do you use back, right? And this is how you would string it all together. What I think is interesting about Fitbit is the FDA trying to make a process that encourages development, and Fitbit deciding mental health is going to be one of their core businesses, that they think there's going to be money in this, which I think is really interesting. Also wanted to talk.
I think Fitbit is considering that is continuing to consider the implications for their technology for health in general. They have been allergic to Fitbit as a regulated device. Mm-hmm. And they have no interest and they've been very public about their lack of interest in being regulated by the federal government. So I think that this is another step for them strategically to make this data available to healthcare providers in such a way that they can use it for whatever purpose they would choose, but for Fitbit to not be in the healthcare business.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about why people wear things and don't, because one of the problems with Fitbit is getting people to wear them long enough to create the data and then do something with the data. And I think this is sort of like one of the issues is people don't wear their wearables, or they wear some wearables and not others, right? And I mean, one of the things that Fitbit was, is selling a device that people wear a little bit and then quit using. Someone was even talking about, and was it M who was talking about the bracelet that people wore that would help calm them in stressful situations. So then the issue would be that you would need to be wearing the bracelet when you needed it, which people might not do. So I think so part of this is Fitbit might be creating a product that people might be incentivized to wear longer than just for information's sake. Or maybe it is that you take that Fitbit technology and you build it into something else that you do wear every day. An Apple, of course, a watch and your phone, right? Did I April-splain it? Go, Bart.
No, I think that's the real question, isn't it? I mean, one, do you have to take it off and recharge your Fitbit? How long does a Fitbit go before you have to recharge it?
So this
depends on.
Yeah, so the Ionic and their new one, I don't remember what it is. They last for about 4 days to a week.
So you are definitely more of a wearable user, Chris, right?
The HR2 less about
right? So as a person who is the kind of person that would generate the data that Fitbit would be interested in, a user of their products, what do you think of this?
So I think, honestly, outside, there's a couple different things. You have the people who are really looking at tracking their data. Those people aren't wearing Fitbits. It's just the bottom line. They're wearing Garmin. They're wearing the Garmin Phoenix 235 or whatever, the one that has
isn't
like
Garmin how I used to drive my car 8 years ago?
Garmin was big.
It is, and Garmin still is really big in the running sphere and the exercise and activity sphere.
And aviation.
They have do what?
Aviation GPS. They were the leader. They were the market leader there from the very beginning, and they've continued.
Right. So what's interesting is that for a lot of these more activity or fitness related devices, you don't find things like notifications or other stuff that you get from your phone. You can sync it to your phone, but you aren't getting that information. But what you do get with your Fitbit, or what you do get with your Apple Watch, is this addictive quality of like, oh, I can just look down and, oh, now I see that I had a text message literally just now, or I just had a text, or I had an email or whatever. So there's like this sort of engagement, but now they're adding things like treasure maps and other things. So I think what we're really going to have to see, and this is exactly what Apple went through when they came out with their iPhone. They had some really interesting ideas for apps that they thought people were going to like, that they thought people would be engaged with and keep coming back and using. But in reality, they had no idea what people were going to use their device for. Steve Jobs knew people wanted to use it, knew people were going to take advantage of its capacity and its capabilities, but they didn't know how it was going to work. So what we're really going to have to wait for with the Fitbit, with any wearable, is for other people to design stuff that is going to be effective for our uses. Or one of us. Dear God, please, one of you people, make some.
So Andy Brown, first of all, I want to say hi to Andy Brown, who is a delightful human being. Also, he talks about having a device implanted in the creepy future. Like, can we have like a subcutaneous device? Can we implant a wearable under our skin? Like, sort of as a joke, but that's actually like a thing. Tony and Chris are giving a nod.
Implantables. It's a whole genre.
Is that like an Encrustable?
I would assume so.
I like the strawberry Encrustables. The grape are okay. The strawberry Encrustables are delicious.
So tell us a little bit, because I mean so we just had somebody talk about I wear my device and I love it, except for when I can't find the charger. And I can just imagine somebody who's having mood problems, I just can't find the charger. And that's when the data stops. But an implantable, Tony, tell us a little bit about what's happening with that.
Well, it's emergent. It's new and emergent. So you got a whole new class of medical devices similar to those that are used to replace heart valves and stents and surgical pins and things that go into your body and stay there. Surgeons put them in you, and they just live there indefinitely. Knee implants, stuff like that. No reason these things cannot be in the future synchronous data sources. So,
and I have to tell you, I think I would love an activity tracker if I could just sort of, set it and forget it. And I think that Ophir was talking a lot about that, where right at the beginning, you sort of consent and you sort of forget about it unless you want to turn it off, right? And so it works for birth control.
You can get an awful lot of signal just from a cell phone with no need for an activity tracker. You can get a lot of information. You can extrapolate a great deal of data just from what's going on with a cell phone.
Except for I never have mine and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about population level stuff here. So
yeah,
you're
I'm not there.
Each individual person down to a single case. Is it most important to discuss every single case, or could we make some progress without identifying every single case?
You make an excellent point. Shizzle. Okay, it is. We only have 3 minutes left. We went past maybe the last 20 minutes, and I've hardly looked up because I was trying to read the thread. So we're getting down to final thoughts. Final thoughts for me, and I'm going to go first on this one, is that we really should be paying attention to the policy and market forces that impact development and design. So we need to know that the FDA is going to change medical device software development, and because it might impact who's going to do wearables or software development related to mental health. And we should be paying attention to which companies are doing that instead of waiting for them to do something and then reacting to it a year later. I mean, we just need to be keeping up on these market forces and understanding how they work. That's my final thought. Bart Andrews.
Final thoughts. I think within 10 years, it'll be standard when you go to your doctor that you're going to download or they'll already have access to data that about your activity, and you'll be reviewing it and looking at it. That in fact, this will become something that's incredibly, and I don't think, what do you think, Tony? 10 years, something about, I mean, this is going to be something that.
I think 10 years is safe. It's going to make medical care so much cheaper and easier for you, the consumer. Yeah. That, you know, the only people that will want to opt out are people that are very wealthy that can afford to pay unlimited amounts of money.
I'm not kidding. There's going to be a time within 10 to 15 years where you won't have to go to the urgent care clinic or the ED for a lot of stuff. You'll just literally sync in, upload your data, monitors, and you'll get information, and it's going to be amazing. I'm actually really excited about it.
Chris Maxwell.
That would be so much more accurate than WebMDing every single thing, and then learning that we're like either pregnant or have polio, one of the two. I don't know.
If my Fitbit tells me I'm knocked up, we're going to have words.
We didn't get to talk about sensor density, but I'm going to say really quick and make the show run late that your cell phone sensor density continues to go up. So there's more and more sensors in your cell phone, and there's going to be more and more over time. And so your ability to have a blood lab in your pocket is a real strong likelihood. So you're not going to have to go into urgent care to find out if you have a strep infection. You can just cough on your phone.
And on that delicious note, want to say, oh, that is so gross.
I'm fine. It says I'm fine.
That's not what it says. I want to give a shout out to Grace Durbin. She said she had a final thought. Do we study suicidal behaviors in animals? Do animals become suicidal? I got nothing on Fitbit. I don't know if that data is terrifying or comforting. It's a dialectic. It's sort of both. And Grace Durbin, my brother BJ, thinks it's terrifying, and he told me so at brunch this morning. And in terms of, do we study suicidal behavior in animals, and do animals become suicidal? Who do we refer Grace to, kids?
Zoologists?
No.
Joiner's books reference animal suicide. There's the big myth. What are the
Google use social behavior? What's this? Ian Serro did Ian Serro did a new paper on. Well, no, he didn't. That wasn't his. That was another. That was one of his research partners.
There's that one rodent that people say does mass suicide, and that's not actually true.
That's not true.
Lemmings. That's not true. Lemmings don't attempt mass suicide.
No, they just jumped off a cliff.
Did you just use presidential
into the ocean?
It's lemmings. Cut me some slack. Cut me some slack. I caught myself.
Hey, everybody. It's another hour. We're so glad that you joined us. Remember that if you have Fitbit data and you want to donate, or other kinds of wearable data, and you want to donate that for research, that our data helps, that there are ways that this data can be donated and be given to scientists who are interested in studying it, which I think has a lot of benefits over Fitbit just doing it by themselves. That's just me. Not that we wouldn't love to work with anybody doing this, but ourdatahelps.org. Please donate your data today. Next week, we're going to be discussing how we're turning, as we're sort of wrapping up formats with SPSM, we have had a wonderful reach out, and we're going to be turning all of our SPSMs into podcasts. Hostway! So we have an appointment to work on that. We've been working on that for a little while. It's been in the works. We're going to be getting to that by next Sunday. And so we're going to talk about how you do that. He's going to tell you why we screw up our microphones all the time. We're going to grow up and get a little bit more professional, and tell you how you can get some of that stuff and related podcasts that folks who are members of our chat might really like. And so we will see you next week. Everybody have a fabulous week. Bye.
Good night, everybody.